All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. This is Web Wednesday, the show where I bring on people that are much smarter than me to chat about various web dev topics. Today, I'm really happy to be joined by Anthony Shaw, who's a relatively new team member of mine, to come on and chat about I think I can safely say this. Probably my favorite web framework, and that is Django or Python Django. That if you're not already familiar with Django, first of all, you're in the right place. But second of all, Django is built for data-driven websites. And what's amazing about it is it does all of those little things that just take up a lot of time, but are needed on every single data-driven website that you ever create. But you don't want to listen to me talk about it. You want to listen to Anthony talk about it. So let me go ahead and bring Anthony on. Anthony, thank you so much for joining today. Greatly appreciate it.
Hey, Christopher. Yeah, really pleased to be here. And hey, everybody.
Yeah, so I always like to start with the basic question of how did you become Anthony Shaw? How did you get into development? How did you find yourself doing Python and at Microsoft?
Yeah, well, I've only been at Microsoft since February, so it's been 3.5 months since I've joined. And yeah, I found myself at Microsoft really working a lot with Python, the Python community over the last few years. And found out about this amazing opportunity to work in the sort of developer relations team and to just be able to do the stuff that I'm really passionate about, which is experiment with new technologies, play with all things Python related, and actually just to try and make the experience better as well. I've been in software for quite a long time, got into programming as a kid and kind of followed that traditional path, I guess. Really enthusiastic about just being able to make the computer do what I told it to do most of the time. And a polyglot really. So I've worked with lots of different programming languages over the years, and then found Python about 8 years ago in actually visiting Microsoft when I wasn't working there. But I actually became I was staying in a hotel in Seattle, and then I became ill, and I got trapped in the hotel because I was supposed to fly to New York, and then that got cancelled because I had an ear infection and I couldn't fly. So I stayed in the hotel for 4 days to recover and had nothing to do. So I just sat in my hotel room and learned a new programming language, which was Python. And that kind of took my career on a whole new level. I just really love the language. It's so expressive and fluent and easy to work with, and you can rapidly build applications across a whole range of different stacks. You can work with web applications. You can write simple scripts to, automate things on your computer. You can do like data analysis and stuff like that. So I just love its flexibility and been using it ever since.
I love that. And I suppose that's, one thing to do with, 4 days where you just, are stuck somewhere and can't go is just go learn a new programming language. You hit a really big point, I think, on Python, and it's probably my favorite thing about Python as well, is the fact that it'll grow with you, that it's a great starter language or great beginner language. But like you said, then now you can literally go in and write whatever it is that you want. So if you want to become a web developer, you can do that. If you want to get into data science, you can do that. Like really whatever it is that you want to be able to do, Python can do that. And that's it's sort of true about some of the other languages, but I think it's most true when it comes to Python.
Yeah, probably the closest to Python in terms of the flexibility would be JavaScript and the applications you can do through Node.js. And I think it's probably, in terms of the ecosystem, the one that it's compared to the most. You can do a lot of web development with JavaScript, obviously, both back end and front end, but data science is the field that Python has really kind of claimed over the last few years, and just some amazing stuff that's been done recently with the Mars rover, and a lot of the scientific work that was done on the Mars rover was all run on Python. The black hole imaging project, most of the analytics and data science behind that was all in Python. and it's all on GitHub actually as well. If you're interested in the black hole imaging project, the way in which they did that was in Python, and they've shared all the code behind that. It's fascinating, way beyond my intelligence level to understand. But yeah, that's in part due to a technology called Jupyter, which is basically a way of it's almost like an interactive scientific paper in the browser. And in Jupyter Notebooks, which is you can use in VS Code as well, you kind of write your scientific paper, and instead of writing the equations and code snippets in like a text editor or something, you're writing it in an interactive console, and you can execute all of your snippets. So if you're saying, oh, we collected this data and this is the graph, then you write the Python code to analyze the data, and then you press play and it draws the graph. So when the data changes, you just press play across the whole thing and it redraws all the graphs. So like the scientific community is really picking this up as a way of having interactive demonstrations and research into lots of different areas, especially ones that analyze lots of data. And so Jupyter, I think, is a great complementary technology. And Python now has got this massive ecosystem of projects which are built for the scientific community. There's even like astrophysics libraries, like for analyzing the positions of planets and stars in Python. It's just amazing what you can find if you look hard enough.
I'm laughing here because there's an old coworker of mine who loved to say we're not launching rockets here, and what he meant when he said that was, whatever it is that we're doing, somebody else has created a library and put it out there, and I guess even if now you're launching rockets, somebody has created a library and put it out there that you could go ahead and grab. That's fantastic. I love it. Definitely. So speaking of kind of a perfect transition here, that not launching rockets, somebody's created a library. Somebody's created this fantastic library, this fantastic framework called Django. So in a nutshell, what is Django?
So Django is a web framework, and in Python, we like to use the phrase batteries included. So when we talk about Python itself, we say it's batteries included because it comes with a standard library of utilities to do all sorts of stuff, whether that's like working with sound, reading and writing from files, working with XML or HTML. So like built into the standard library in Python, there's a range of different things. Django is kind of similar in that it's a batteries included web framework. So you can basically write a data-driven web application fully in Python. Well, you need some HTML as well, but fully in Python that can basically have a database behind it. You can describe your the structure of the database. You can describe the different URLs you want to have, the pages, how they interact with each other. You can do, data validation. You can do caching, templating. So it's kind of got everything you need to write a fully functioning website and a web application. And you don't really need to branch outside of Django once you're using Django. So it's what's called an opinionated framework, because really kind of you stick with how Django says you should build the web application, which is brilliant if you're just getting started. And it's also brilliant if you want to scale. So even it runs some of the smallest websites, but it also runs some of the biggest websites on the internet. So, there's some sites that have got hundreds of millions of users running Django, and it's been optimized and scaled up to that level. So, that's kind of why Django is so brilliant, is that you can start small and work your way up.
Okay. Now, I also know that Flask is out there, and of course, Flask is another very popular Python web framework. How would you contrast Flask to Django?
So I guess the term is it's more of a micro framework, but that doesn't really mean anything to most people. Or myself, actually, I don't understand what that means. But I say Django is opinionated. So when you want to describe your data and your data models, you use Django's library to do that. Whereas with Flask, you can use the built-in one or you can use a different one. So it's kind of more extensible, and you can chop and change parts of Flask. So Flask and Django have always kind of been as popular as each other over the last few years, sharing equal amounts of developer market share, I guess. They're both free, so it's not really a market share in the traditional sense. But, in terms of the number of sites deployed with both technology, it's pretty equal. But Flask is more flexible. And because it's more flexible, you can kind of take out parts that you don't need. And you can plug in other things that maybe you want to use. So instead of using a SQL database, you might want to use a NoSQL database, for example. You can do that with Flask, but you can't do that with Django.
Okay, all right, that makes a lot of sense. So then, because I know you have a demo. How does a Django project look? How do I start creating it? That you mentioned that it's opinionated, that I sort of need to do things a particular way. How do I do then those things in a particular way? How do I get started with Django?
So first thing you need is Python. So
Okay.
you'll definitely need to install a recent version of Python on your local machine. The latest is 3.9. 3.10 is probably due out towards the end of the year. Django also has like major versions that they've released as Django 1, Django 2, and Django 3. So the current version is Django 3, which works with the newest version of Python. So you would need, to get started, you'd need Python 3, so 3.9 probably to install. And then once you've done that, you can use the Python packaging manager, which is called pip, to install Django locally. So you do pip install Django. And then once you've done that, you can do Django start project, which is a wizard that will just create all the boilerplate stuff for you, all the folder structures, and basically get you up and running with a web app that does nothing to start with. But yeah, it's at least kind of got the basics already.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Your webcam bipped there for just like a second, but you're back
Yeah.
for now, so hopefully it will just stay that way.
I think it does that. It needs to blink every so often
I mean,
to clean the lens.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Don't we all? Okay, so I can install it then just by using pip, and then you mentioned that there's a little utility that I can use then to bootstrap the application. So all of that is kind of built right in from there. Okay.
Yeah, so all the quick start guides you'll find on Django will suggest using the Django admin command to start a new project. And then kind of once you've done that, then you add the application to the project. And then it would create a set of boilerplate files, Python files for you to work with. Because this is Python, even though you're writing a web application that's going to produce HTML, you're mostly working in Python. So you're going to need a code editor that is good with Python. So obviously I'll be showing VS Code, but there's other options as well.
Are there?
So yeah. Yeah, I think historically there were some other things, but we don't talk about those anymore.
Okay, cool. Well, then why don't you show us a Django app?
Yep, absolutely. Let's do that. Well, I can share the one that you and I have been working on because you're going to be familiar with this. So. Like I said before, this is this is my VS Code setup. I have not any unusual customizations apart from the cat in the corner, but the main thing is the Python extension for VS Code is something that you need to have as a requirement before you're up and running. Also, you tend to work in the terminal quite a bit with Django to run a few commands and stuff like that. So often, it's kind of useful to have a terminal ready to go if you need it. We won't do that yet, but I'll show you just the layout of this project. So this is a project that we've been fleshing out and creating some videos about, which is going to be interesting in a couple of months when this is launched. But yeah, basically you have a few basic concepts inside Django. I guess the main one, kind of the entry point to the application is a set of URLs that the Django app will decide to direct the user to different parts of the application. So in other frameworks, I guess these are called routes. Sometimes you annotate a piece of code like a function or something with a route label. In Flask, you definitely do that. In Django, you keep it all in one list. You can split this up if your application is massive. You can have different files to describe different sections of the application. But generally, you've kind of got this routing, kind of like a routing table, I guess, as the entry point for Django. And inside this, you would say, okay, if somebody goes to /about, then execute this function, and I'll show you what that means in a second. And then within that, you can then give that a name. So if you ever need to direct someone or create a link to that route, you don't need to hard code the path. You can just refer to it by name. So, we've got the about page and the destinations page, and we can just refer to those by name. Also, because Django is designed to be data-driven, you've also got this concept that most of the pages will be backed off onto a website and a database. And within the database, you're going to have tables and you're going to have rows which represent, objects or things in your application, depending on what they are. So in this application, this is a fake space agency that we put together, and I can show you what those models look like in a second. But I mean, the absolute basics of this is that you say, okay, we have a route, and then we then have a file called views, and inside this we have a Python function, and the URL views.index basically goes to this function. So when somebody goes to that part of the page, it runs this code, and then you can decide what you want to do with the user from there. So in this case, we're just going to do the most basic thing, which is just render. So basically parse this HTML template and send that back to the user. So Django also has a templating engine. It's actually got two templating engines built in, but the most popular one, I guess, is the Django templating engine, which gives you the ability to write HTML files that combine both HTML tags that you'd be familiar with, as well as these little helper tags. So some things, for example, you might want to chop and change parts of the page depending on the data in the database, or depending on other attributes. You can also do things like have a template that all of the pages extend from. So this is something that you don't want to copy and paste the same massive block of HTML with all the headers and stuff. So you can just use these special tags. So anything that kind of has a curly brace and a percentage basically represents a server-side tag for Django. And Django has got like hundreds of these built-in server-side tags that can do anything from pull data from the database all the way through to doing inline swapping out translations for different languages. I've worked with Django apps where you could say this is the English version, but you can have a lookup table for all the different languages you support. There's even a tag for lorem ipsum. If you just want to put boilerplate in, there's a built-in tag for that. So working with dates, formatting dates, there's like so much flexibility in the templating system. And I can show you a slightly more complex example. But I'm sure you have questions, Christopher, so I'll answer your questions first.
Yeah, so I guess so. My first question then is sort of like with the routing is, so basically, like if we get right down to it, what you're doing is somebody goes to some particular path, and then all we're doing in response to that is just executing some function, some method that's then going to respond to that.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So, in these cases, these are functions that we've written in Python. It takes a request, which is an object, and you can get information from that request object, such as the get parameters, the post parameters, stuff like that. So I guess in smaller frameworks like micro frameworks, you might say, okay, well, let's get the parameters and let's get the post attributes, and we're going to have a form maybe that they might have rendered, and let's grab all the data out of that. But Django does that for you, and that's kind of the magic of Django. Like what I've shown you so far, you can do in pretty much any web framework. Like just rendering HTML based on a URL route is not very impressive. You can do that in pretty much any web framework worth using anyway. But it's kind of where it comes to life is, where you actually start to think about the data that you're working with. So in this case, we talk about destinations, and then you can kind of see this funny syntax here that says int pk. So pk is is the unique key for that instance, I guess that destination, and int is the integer. So the way we've set up our database is that we have a table of destinations, and you describe all your data tables in a models file. So in our case, we've kind of got this class called destination that inherits from a Django-based class called model, and you describe all the fields that you'd have on this. So just to start with, we've got name and description. Name is a char field and description is a text field. And then you can put any constraints that you need on there. So, when you're working with purely with JavaScript, for example, if there is a database that you're backing off onto, you'd have to do all that like client-side validation of, is this the right length? Does it have the right fields? But you can do that in Django and express all of that in Python. So, in the case where we've got, a destination here and a description, you can then also say, okay, if we have an object which relates to that, so for example, a space cruise has to be going somewhere, you'd hope, it doesn't just fire off into space. So you can actually describe the relationships between the different models that you've got in your database. So, in this case, we say this cruise has got actually many destinations that can make many stops, which is pretty cool. So this is a many-to-many field, and we'll call that relationship cruises. So when we refer to, when we get a list of cruises from the database, then, we can see both the destinations for that cruise. And also when you get a list of destinations, you can also do a reverse lookup to say what cruises are available on that for you. So this is kind of Django's data model, I guess. And in terms of the fields that it supports, it's got all the stuff that you kind of need for a basic web application. You want to express an email address, so you use that. Maybe if you want people to upload images, then there's an image field. If you want to work with JSON data, then there's a JSON field. So kind of everything you'd need for a web app is kind of built into Django, which is what's so cool about it. And it actually does the hard work of translating this Python file into a database for you. So Django works off this concept called migrations. So once you've kind of expressed the data that runs the web application, you run another command called make migrations. So Django manage.py make migrations, and that will generate these migrations files, which you never need to look into, but basically it's a file that expresses to a system what needs to exist in the database in terms of the structure. So these files will exist as migrations as a point in time. So let's say you want to use Postgres as the database server, or MySQL, or even SQLite is the built-in one. Then when you build the migrations, you can configure which database backend you want to use. And then you just run migrate, and it creates all the tables for you, all the structures. It creates all the foreign key relationships for the models that you've expressed. And then when you basically want to then run your website, your database is there and ready for you. So it kind of automates all of that database management stuff, which becomes so tricky when you're working in production environments.
Okay, so then that's going to be my object relational mapper. That's going to be my ORM. Like if we were going to put this into .NET terms, that sounds an awful lot like Entity Framework. That I can go in,
Yeah.
I can describe my schema, and then Entity Framework is able to create the database and manage it and handle all of the updates and so forth. And then what I'm also hearing from you is that my database type, that could change, but I don't need to worry about like recreating my migrations. I don't need to worry about recreating my data model, that's just going to work. So if I'm doing SQLite locally and I'm doing Postgres in production, that all of that's going to behave the way that it should without me having to do anything special.
Yeah, exactly. So it's for people who are familiar with Entity Framework and I guess the migration model that has. So similar to a DAC pack, I guess, it would create the migrations files. They're not specific to the database backend. So, if you do want to use SQLite locally, SQLite's brilliant because it doesn't require a service or a server to be running on your local machine. It's just like a plain text. It's not even plain text. It's a binary file with a database inside it. It's fairly performant. It's good enough for local. You don't have to run SQL Express Edition or anything locally. You can just have this file with all the data inside it. And then when you deploy to production, you can go all the way up to a Postgres cluster or SQL as well. You can use Microsoft SQL Server with Django. Microsoft actually maintains a plugin for Django that works with Microsoft SQL Server.
Okay. I do want to go back real quick to the to the model because one of the other big things that I notice in there is that that there's also like validation as well. So it's not just that you're saying that hey, this is a car field or a char field. Car char isn't quite as a it's not quite as heated of a debate as say GIF or GIF. And by the way, the correct answer is GIF. I'm willing to stake my place in the sand on that one. But when it comes to like car char, I find myself just flip flopping back and forth. So whichever it is that you want to pronounce it as. But I noticed that you've got like char field, and that you've also then got things like max length and whether or not it can be blank and so forth. Is that going to be enforced only on the server, or is that also going to be enforced on the client as well?
So there's different parts to the enforcement, I guess, working all the way from the database up. So if you say that this field cannot be null, so it can't be. So I guess databases there's both. So blank could be just an empty string in a database. It could also be null. So some database engines, depends on the database, but some of them actually support null as a field value. So if you say this cannot be null, when it builds the database, it will actually say in the table, this field cannot be null. So even if at the database level, you can't even put data into the table. Some of the other, so I guess more value specific ones, max length would be part of the, this would be a varchar 50 field basically when it gets created, or an nvarchar. I can't remember off the top of my head which one it would be, depending on which database backend. Yeah. But it would actually create the tables with those constraints for you. And then it also does another level, which is that when you're submitting data through a form, so if you've created a client-side form and you've submitted data, it does server-side validation of the data. It also does another level, which is that when you generate HTML forms in Django, it adds some of the constraints to the HTML attributes, so the input fields. So the input fields will actually have the max length kind of encoded into them. So that's all that stuff's in sync, basically. That's the nice thing about it, is that the HTML form on the front end would have the max length on the input field. The server-side validation that gets run when you click submit would check some of those attributes. And then the database has also got both the the length validation as well as null validation and any other attributes. So it's not just length blank and null. You can also do you can go nuts if you want and do like full regexes and stuff like that. There's a common mistake people make is they write a regex for email and then only later figure out that there's an email field built in, which has got all that stuff for you. But yeah, if you want to go crazy with the validation, you can do that. You can also write validation functions in the model. So you can basically extend this class by adding additional methods to it, which would do server-side validation when the form is submitted. So, if you want to check that, the date of the cruise is, not in the past or something. You could do all that stuff, but you can do that server-side in Python.
Okay. You sort of set it up, and there's like a question that leads in perfectly to this is you mentioned that this is going to create a form for me. So Joss asked the question, well, the first question is, how do forms work? And then the second is about trying to work with multiple forms. So let's start with one. So how do forms work in Django? How could I then create an info request, for example?
Okay, so I guess there's two ways of doing it. There's two main ways of doing it. One is that Django will create the form automatically. So it will basically look at the model and figure out, what the inputs are to create one of those. So the way that is done is typically through a view. So if you wanted to create, let's see what we've got here. This is the info request create view. We're actually going to import two utilities which do all the automation and stuff for creating the form for us. So in this case, we've got this one called generic create view. And this is basically a base class that you can inherit from that knows what the form needs to look like. It is assuming that you're showing a page with a form that asks for the attributes. When you click on submit, it will go and create the thing in the database. So it's kind of like does all that for you. It's all the boilerplate's done. And all you need to provide is which model are we creating. So, in this case, we're creating the info request object, which was, it had a name, email, notes, and cruise. It also detects that cruise is going to be a foreign key. So when, it's not going to ask you for a foreign key ID in the form. It's going to give you a drop down to let you select which one. If it's a foreign key in this way, so it's a one-to-one relationship.
Mm-hmm. No, one to many.
It is. One to many, sorry. Then it will give you the drop-down list. If it's a many-to-many relationship, in the case of destinations, for example, then you can select multiple options from the list. So instead of a drop-down, it's more of a select field. For email, it would give you a text field. For notes, it would do a larger text field. And for the name, it would just give you a simple input box. So this kind of does everything you need. You can also be more specific and say, okay, the fields that I want you to put on the form would be name, email, cruise, and notes. So maybe if you've got some fields that you just want to keep internal and you don't want to show on the form, you can do that. And then the other thing you can mix in is this success message, which says, once that has finished, then where should we send the user to? So the success URL, like I mentioned with the URLs, you can just name them. So this one we just call index. So if you want to redirect the user to the index page, you can basically do a reverse route. So you can say, work out where index goes to, but don't do it right now. Do it when the user needs it, which is what lazy means. So reverse lazy, don't do that right now and figure it out. Just when the user needs it, just send them wherever that goes.
I think that's a good
and it
way
will do
just
that
to
for you.
approach life in general. Is just once somebody needs it, then go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I'll deal with that later. That's the I think that's the definition of it. So yeah, in terms of the form that it would create as well. So you might be thinking, okay, I've got to create all the input fields and the buttons and everything. So this is where Django, I guess, really shines, is that the templating language that I was talking about kind of comes with all these built-in tags. One of those built-in tags is literally just the word form, which will just render all the HTML required for the form. So it knows that if it's drawing this template, then it's going to share a form that for that particular model, which is going to ask for name, email, cruise, and notes. This extra thing here, which says crispy, is something that you've added, Christopher, and it's not in relation to your name. It is just basically an extension for Django that makes the forms look like they came from the 21st century. So it kind of makes them responsive and puts a bit of Bootstrap 4 in there and stuff. So it's not just the generic HTML tags. It's their Bootstrap 4, so it adds all the classes and stuff to the HTML attributes. So it builds a responsive form. So in this most basic example, I guess, we're just sharing simple HTML. Now, I'm sure there are people out there thinking, that's great, but I want to have absolute control over, everything, how it looks, how it feels. I don't want to just share these tags. I want to add, crazy client-side validation or type-aheads or, it could be any number of things you wanted to add. In those cases, I guess step one would be see if someone else has already done that for you. So don't reinvent the wheel. So because Django is so popular, then there's basically a massive ecosystem of extensions for Django, which come in and they provide most of the functionality that you could think of. So, if you wanted to have a field like a search field that had type aheads, for example, so if it says enter the destination and you start typing MA and it fills in Mars, and that's database, that does a search in the database, then there's a Django extension that does that. So, most of the functionality that you would need has already been written, and you pull that stuff in and use it rather than writing your own. If you do need to write your own, you can go nuts in terms of what functionality you can write in Django. So yes, it is generic out of the box, but you can basically customize everything. Like you can, to the point where you're not even drawing HTML, you could render JSON, for example, or even XML if you were feeling crazy.
Yeah, I'm just sharing out. There's even like a website, and you mentioning this just triggered it in my head, called Django Packages, that has just a fantastic list of packages. So yeah, that like Anthony mentioned, that if you want to do it, it's out there. And what I also really love is, every single web developer in the world has been down this path. Is you spend all of this time, even if you're using something like Entity Framework or Mongoose or something like that, that you spend all of this time describing your schema and putting it all in there, and then what you have to turn around and do is start building your HTML form. And so frequently that winds up just becoming a lot of just like copy and paste that input box and label 5 times, and then just going back and renaming all of the IDs, and invariably like forgetting to rename one or something like that. And it's such a tedious process. And so that just being able to say curly form, and that's it, you're done, is such a wonderful feature.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the tags, I guess that would be the forms version. If you are working with a sequence of things, so we shared that in the models there was this class called destination, which has got name and description. And if in the URL you want to see a list of destinations, that would just be destinations. And then the view, would just basically, from the database, we're going to ask for all destinations, and we're going to render the template called destinations.html, and we're going to set something in the render context called a variable called destinations, which will have that list. Those are lazily, there's a lot of lazy things in Django, but those are lazily evaluated. So it won't actually fetch everything from the database up front. It will do that when you request the information. So in the template, when you then say, okay, I want to loop over each destination, you can kind of do this combined HTML and Django templating. So you can say, okay, here's a for loop, and then for each destination in the database, I want to render an anchor link, and here's all the attributes I want on that. And then each one of those should be clickable. And instead of remembering all the URLs for everything, you can again use this magic tag, which will be work out where the destination detail name is in the route table. So that is this one here. And then, the destination number, so that the private key for that, and then that will be the second attribute on the call. So it does all that stuff for you, and all you need to do really here is just fill in the blanks. So what do you want this to look like? How's it going to show? So in terms of sharing a list of objects from a database or even filtering them, Django's ORM is pretty powerful. So, we're just doing all here, but you could do any number of things. You could do a limit, for example. You could do a query to say, I want to aggregate data and find the maximum number, or I want to filter by some specific attributes. It's really clever in terms of the way it works. So you could, for example, filter on the name field, or you could filter on a range. There's a huge amount of things you can do with Django's ORMs. If you use other ORMs, you kind of expect that functionality. But yeah, that's kind of built in as well.
That's fantastic. I'd love to see the page, and in particular, I'd love to see the form that's generated there. So if you can launch the app.
Yeah, I think I may have broken it before we started talking.
Uh-oh.
So hopefully this is going to work. Yeah, I know. This is the problem with doing live demos. Let's see. Maybe if you ask me some questions in the background, I'll pretend that it hasn't crashed on me.
Oh no. Do you have is there a missing Vim file or an environmental variable? Give it 2 seconds here.
No.
Okay.
No, sorry.
Okay. Not a problem. Okay. Cool. So let's talk a little bit then about those couple of detail views that I noticed that you've got there. So we already talked about the create view, that what that can do automatically for you is generate the form. What are those detail view then?
Yeah, so the create view would do the form for you, and the detail view basically would get a single instance. So in the URLs, if we had cruise / and then the cruise number, then we would show the cruise detail view. So that would come to here, and the logic to actually look up in the database, get the cruise for that, that ID, that's all kind of built in. So the detail view, these are called class-based views, where you have a class which inherits from one of the template views, I guess, the base views. And this one is called detail view. So there's detail view, create view, edit view, delete view. There's a couple of others as well. I can't remember all of them, but
There's a
detail view
list
assumes.
view.
Yeah, list view. So this one is assuming that you just want to show a page with the information about that one instance in the database. So it does all the lookups for you and the database query and stuff for you. So all you have to fill in terms of the gaps is what should we call the instance from the database once we've fetched it. So we call it cruise. Which model are we looking up? So that's the cruise model. And what is the name of the template that you want to render? So the template would be the cruise detail template. And in this template, you would show the name of the cruise. In the big heading, you'd show the description of the cruise. And we can use these double curly braces to do inline replacement of the attributes from the database entry. And then because the cruise includes this relationship to destinations, so in the model we had destinations as an attribute, which was a many-to-many field. Then we have one instance of cruise, so let's find out what destinations that cruise goes to. So instead of remembering, your SQL from studying computer science and thinking, is it an inner join? Is it left or right? Is it? You can basically just refer to it by really simple cruise detail. A really simple version, which would be for destination in cruise.destinations. So destinations.all would say, do the lookup for me. And like I mentioned, that's lazily evaluated. So, it will do the lookup, when it's requested here, and it will run the query on the database. And then you can actually loop over the destinations as objects in the template as well. So it's really powerful in terms of working with relational data in databases, which, in so many cases end up how your data schemas and stuff are modeled is you've got many-to-many and one-to-many relationships in the database.
Okay. How about the admin site? That this is probably my favorite feature in Django, and it's one we haven't yet talked about. So what is the admin site in Django?
Yeah, so Django has a built-in admin portal. So it's debatable, I guess, whether you want to keep this on or off. So once you've kind of created this stuff, or you've created the models, you might want to seed some data into the database, set up some templates and things like that. So Django comes with an admin site out of the box, and the admin site is at /admin. You can change that, but the admin app will basically let you edit anything that you've described. So you've got your destinations and your cruises in the models. So here we've got cruise info request and destination. So you can create all the HTML to share all that stuff and to edit it and things like that. But maybe some things you don't want to have an edit field for that everybody can use, like only administrator should be able to edit it. So in that case, you'd use the admin portal. So once you create the Django app out of the box, you just go to /admin and you log in as the super user that you create using the create super user command. So you do Python manage.py create super user, create your username and password for your super user account, and then you can log into the admin backend. This is a great way of basically managing the data that's in the database, as well as some of the additional attributes. You can do the admin portal and have this kind of concept of super users, which is brilliant for getting started and up and running. But then I guess as you think about, who do you want to give permissions to manage your site and how should the security and stuff like that work, then you kind of get into this area in terms of the class-based views where you can use permissions mixin. So there's something called a permission required mixin, which is something. So Django's security model is that you can describe a permission is granted to edit this particular model. So if this is a cruise, for example, then you can have role-based access control. So a generic user would be given the ability to submit an info request to look at the cruise details, look at the destination details, but they can't create a new cruise. Like someone visiting the space agency shouldn't be able to create their own cruise. Or even create destinations. Like they can't invent planets. So kind of where you kind of get to next is once you've built these views, you want to start to lock it down. So that's kind of where you build on the permission required, mix it if you're using class-based views, or you can do, if you're doing functions, then you can do that as a wrapper on the function, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's required or permission required on the function, which would say, make sure that whoever's viewing this page can do this thing. I mean, ideally, you would do that both on the view and also on the link. So you wouldn't even show the link to edit it if they don't have permission to do it in the first place. And that's kind of where Django, again, gets more powerful, is that you can define these roles for different types of users. So you might have a booking agent, for example, who's got the ability to edit cruises or kick people off a cruise. And you can apply. You can say, okay, these are the roles that person, these are the permissions that person would have, and then when you're describing your views and stuff like that, you just use a permission required mix in on the class, and then you list which permissions are required to do this particular task. And then if someone did find that URL or even try to do it, then it's just going to give them a permission required error.
Okay. Now, you did mention that it's debatable whether or not you want to leave the admin site on. I'm curious as to why you might decide to disable that.
So I've done quite a bit of research on Django security. It's a Python security in general is something that I'm really interested in. So I guess in terms of security for Django, there are a number of things that you want to consider before you deploy to production. I guess the common one that people catch is this. It even says a big security warning in big letters. But some research showed that this debug flag. I think every web framework has an equivalent. ASP.NET has an equivalent. Flask has an equivalent. So you run with debug mode turned on. So if your app crashes, which inevitably, when you're developing, you make mistakes and you want to see exactly what happened. You want a stack trace. You want all the information to help you as a developer to fix whatever the problem was. Now that's brilliant. But when you deploy into production, if a user is using the website and it crashes, you don't want to present the user with a stack trace and all the information, because some of that information includes private information that, like keys to things or like what database backend you're using. So you shouldn't leave debug mode on in production on any web framework, including Django. So that's kind of one security concern. The other one is the secret key, which I am showing in full view, but we do change it in the production, and so that one should not be shared with people under certain circumstances. So if you're using cookie-based sessions and you've got your cookies configured in a particular way, then that is a security risk, because people can basically decrypt the cookies. And they can inject malicious data into the cookie. So there's two common things in terms of security. Django also comes with some security built in as well. So cross-site request forgery is one of the OWASP top 10 web vulnerabilities. If you're not familiar with OWASP top 10 and you are a web developer, absolutely go and look into what that is. I'm sure we can share a link maybe in the comments or something. So cross-site request forgery is where you're basically sort of embedding parts of the page and you're tricking users into doing things on the site. So, for example, changing their password or something, like you're basically embedding part of this site in, hijacking a session, and then you're submitting a JavaScript request to get the user to change their password without them noticing. So that's kind of something that's built in. Django has cross-site request forgery, anti-cross-site request forgery built in. Most web frameworks do. It also has cross-frame clickjacking built in as well for security. And there are a number of other things that it would do for cross-site scripting. So, if you, in the cruise description, if you allow people to type a cruise description or put in their name or details. So, if you ask somebody for their name and they try to put in some HTML tags or something in the name, it will escape that automatically. Django's smart enough to sanitize user inputs when they're going into the database, and then also when it's rendering information out, it would sanitize that automatically. Then I guess the other consideration is that you've got this admin site. Now, in terms of the admin site itself is secure. My caution with the security is that, do you know everyone on the site who is an admin? And are you 100% convinced that their username and password is good? And in this day and age, people unfortunately do reuse passwords. So are you sure that all administrators that have access to the admin portal haven't reused the password somewhere else? And has that password been included in a data breach, for example? So if you that's a common thing. So if you do have an admin portal, it's just a caution, I guess, because once you've got access into the admin site, you can edit lots of different things as an administrator would. But yeah, that's my only caution with the admin site, is that you will get just the same as with WordPress, you'll get people with bots hammering the website and just looking for a /admin, and then if they find it, they'll sit there and try and guess passwords. You can change /admin to be something else, which I recommend doing as a default. So in the admin app, you can override the URL for admin, which is just here. So call it something else. I've seen all sorts of variations on the theme, but just change it from the default, I think, is my tip if you want to keep it in production.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. One of the things that, and we're basically at time, but one of the things that maybe we can come back and talk a little bit about later is with authentication that you mentioned, about passwords. And one really nice thing about Django is that it actually has, some various plugins that you could go get to. You could go enable multi-factor authentication, which everybody should have, or, use like GitHub authentication or something like that. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. Anthony, thank you so much for coming on and chatting about Django. I did share out the couple of links to the Learn module, so that way people can go learn more. It's definitely worth highlighting the fact that there's going to be a video series coming out probably about a month or so that Anthony has contributed videos on, and you can go find Anthony at the little address up above his head. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. This is Web Wednesday. We're back again. No, we're not back next week. Next week is Build. And then the week after that, it's actually going to be a special episode that Burke Holland is going to be hosting Anthony's show to talk about static web apps. So Anthony and Anthony. But yeah, so we're not here next week because of Build. Here the week following. Check that out. Go follow Anthony. Anthony, thank you again for coming on, chatting about Django, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday or Thursday, depending on where you happen to be. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.